good evening. Welcome to all of you here in the festival of the Diplomatic Academy. Thanks for your interest. Many people are here, it's really nice, I think we're glad about that. The title of tonight's talk is Time to Say Goodbye, ? And it is about Brexit, of course. There will be a referendum in June in Britain, as David Cameron announced. And on this day, British people will decide on to say with the clash, should I stay or should I go? And yeah, they will decide whether or not to leave the European Union. And I would like to introduce the panel for tonight. Let's start with you. I practiced your name. I'm really proud. I will try not to fail now. So welcome, Ambassador Susan Lejeune. I knew it. I just said, but you have to say, I just said it right 5 seconds ago, so no. So she's the British ambassador to Austria, and she has been in this position since 2012. To her left is Nikolaus Jilch. He's a journalist at the Austrian daily newspaper, Die Presse. To my right is Paul Schmidt from the Austrian Society for European Politics. And Christoph Vavrik from the NEOS party. He's a member of the Austrian parliament, and he wants to say a few words on the NEOS talks.
Yes, thank you. From my side also welcome. This is the 4th session of a cooperation between us, the NEOS parliamentary group, and the Diplomatic Academy. We call it the NEOS Foreign Policy Talks. The idea is to have folks on foreign policy. It's not a party event, okay? It's organized by us together with the Diplomatic Academy, but we make a point that I'm usually the only politician on the panel and the only one from NEOS. This is the 4th session. The first one was a year ago. We started this. It was on the war in Ukraine. The second one was about Austrian neutrality, or what's left from it. The third one was on the Greek crisis, and today we have the 4th session, which is on the Brexit, or the question of whether the UK will remain in the EU and the consequences thereof. That's all I wanted to say about the event. We have it every 3 months, and you're welcome, of course, to register, and then you'll receive an invitation for future. So I give back to Mrs. Reiter.
Thank you. Okay, so let's start with you, and let's maybe have a little bit of an introduction statement on the deal that has been made not quite 2 weeks ago, I think, beginning on the 18th of February. The British Prime Minister David Cameron attended in a marathon negotiation about a new deal for the United Kingdom. The run-up to the meeting was very dramatic. He told to his allies how many shirts he has packed to sweat through before he will come back with a better deal for Britain. And he promised the deal will be better, and central points were the emergency brake on benefits for EU migrants, the UK opt-out from the ever closer union, meaning further integration, and new protections for the UK economy against the Eurozone. So while all these points are certainly inconvenient for at least someone in the European Union, this is not quite what David Cameron was talking about when he was starting to talk about that. He always said we need a leaner union, a less bureaucratic union. You talked about reforming the institutions. So in your view, did he succeed? Did he fail? How good is what he got?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to be here. First of all, I would say that the Prime Minister had a very clear aim when he set out in those negotiations, but they were negotiations, and I think the way in which he went about talking to the other 27 member states was not to put a set of demands on the table and say, hey, these are my demands, you can take them or leave them, and if you don't like them, we're leaving. It was very clear that there had to be some room for manoeuvre in the way that he approached those negotiations. And the negotiations went right down to the wire. I mean, it wasn't some sort of theatrical sideshow what happened in Brussels. There was genuine negotiation going up right until the last minute, and we were getting here hourly updates about the way the negotiations were going. So it was a serious negotiation. I don't think it's quite fair to say he didn't get what he wanted. There were, as you say, 4 main areas where he had said that he wanted to take something back and then put that to the British people for the decision. The first, which you said he didn't touch on, was the whole idea of competitiveness and making Europe, the European economy, less bureaucratic, less regulation, better regulation. And he did achieve something on that. There's a very clear message in the deal that was agreed that the European Union will stand for will have an active trade policy, and that is a very important part of what we think the European Union can achieve in terms of making the Union economically stronger. There are also some commitments to reducing bureaucracy, so looking at the number of regulations that are passed every year and checking that those regulations are adequate and the burden of regulation does not harm businesses, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises. There's also commitment to completing the single market, because although we've come quite a long way in establishing the single market, there are still some big gaps in it. Single market in services is nowhere near complete, and that holds us back. And there's also a long way to go in making the digital single market, which should be a really effective motor for European growth, complete, and something which allows all our economies to grow. That's the first point. The second point is the thing about ever closer union. Ever closer union is not something that the British people want or have ever signed up to. So we now have a firm commitment that we will not be part of that. If other countries, other member states want to go ahead with it, they can, but we will not be part of that. That's the second point. And allied to that, there is an institutional reform, which is to do with the increased power of national parliaments to question and then potentially have withdrawn proposed European legislation. And then it's not something that one national parliament can do. There has to be a number of parliaments which get together, but that means that proposals that are made by the Commission would have to be withdrawn if a sizable enough group of parliaments didn't like them. So that's the second area. The third area is the protection, as you said, of the countries which are not part of the Eurozone, and it's not just the United Kingdom, there are a number of others, and the Danes, like us, have a permanent opt-out of the Euro, and to make sure that the decisions that are taken by the Eurozone countries do not either negatively impact the single market or on our financial services industry, and the decisions are not taken which impact on us that we are not part of. So that's a very important thing for the protection, particularly of our financial services industry, which again is a huge motor for European growth. And then the fourth area, which is the most controversial, and it's the one that's been all over the press, is the access to benefits for EU migrants. And this was the most difficult thing to agree. You won't be surprised to hear that. And there are certain countries not far from here which were very, very concerned when this became part of the negotiation. What we ended up with is a package which preserves free movement, which is one of the fundamental freedoms on which the European Union is based, but not free movement to come in and immediately access what is for us a very generous welfare system. We have a different system from that in other countries because it's a non-contributory system. So in theory, you can get a job in the UK, a low-paid job, and immediately have access to a number of welfare benefits, which in some cases can allow you to double your salary. And that clearly acts as a magnet to encourage sometimes very highly qualified people to take low-paid jobs in the UK. And then there are, first of all, it's a drain on our welfare system, but secondly, it's a drain on the other services that go with it. So we have huge pressure on our schools and our National Health Service with these large numbers. We have a net migration, positive migration, so our population is growing 300,000 people a year. And if we continue to grow at this rate, we will be the most populous country in Europe. I think it's by 2050. So there'll be even more British people than there are Germans, which is fine. Immigration has been really strong for growth for us. It's been one of the things that's kept our economy booming. But there's a resulting pressure on our services. And the other part of that, so there is now a package that's been agreed by all member states that access to benefits will be gradual. So you can come in and take one of these low-paid jobs, or any job, but you will not immediately have access to the full range of benefits. It will be graduated in over a 4-year period, and then there will be another period up to 7 years. And the second part of the package is that if you have child benefit in the UK, which is a sum every month or every week for your children, that will be paid not at the rate. If your children are not in the UK with you, you will not get the UK rate for that. You will get the rate of the country in which your children are, or there'll be a complicated, I don't think the details have yet been worked out, but there'll be some indexing of that. So those are the 4 things that the Prime Minister got agreed. The agreement has the force of an international legal instrument. The European Parliament has said that it will not stop the agreement becoming European legislation. And the opinion polls show that the British public has changed its opinion on whether we should go or whether we should stay. Not yet significantly, but there has been a 3 or 4% swing in favour of staying in the European Union since this package was put on the table. So it has addressed the concerns. It's probably not, it would never have been enough to satisfy those people who are firmly Eurosceptic in the UK. I don't think whatever the Prime Minister had come back would have been enough to satisfy the people who write stories in the Daily Mail and certain members of the Prime Minister's own party. But he believes that it now is the basis for an informed decision on the 23rd of June as to whether we stay, what would you say, or whether we go.
Thank you. Schmidt. The British are very good and very tough negotiators. How strongly were other countries in these negotiations holding against what the British demanded, do you think, or how satisfied or dissatisfied is the rest of Europe with what was negotiated?
That's a very good question. Welcome to all of you, first of all, and thank you for the invitation. I would tend to agree with you that there has been strong negotiation by the UK government. I think from the European institutional point of view, there was the intention to reach a fair, a balanced compromise that other European countries can live with as well. Indeed, I mean, times are difficult. We have different problems on the agenda that everyone wished to talk about, and that needed, in fact, or still need European answers. And that's why I think that the work of the European institution was very important to prepare a compromise that everyone could more or less live with. I was surprised by the readiness by our eastern neighbors to agree to this compromise so quickly. I think that shows, or yes, it shows the preparedness, or that shows the professional way that talks went on before they actually came to this very three-shirt drama in Brussels. I believe that the approach in particular was to try to, and the Spiegel put it that way, to try to make sure that actually we agree on something that the British Prime Minister can actually sell as a success, which then is a good basis to start the real exchange of arguments when it comes up to the referendum. And there was a clear interest to reach a deal and get this issue somehow out of the way, and make sure there's a clear timetable where these things, the pros and cons of the agreement, but of British EU membership, can be discussed, and you have a date fixed where the actual decision is taken to get the whole issue, which is an important issue and which has its spillover effects, but to somehow get it off the table and get to talk about the Middle Eastern crisis and the refugee question as quickly as possible. I believe that politics sometimes is a lot about acting and not only about facts. I agree with the ambassador that a lot of important issues were on the table, but I would say that I would have wished for a much clearer idea of reforming the European Union, but it's also a question of timing. But to finish my first statement, I think the Oscar goes to the British Prime Minister.
You mentioned the refugee crisis. Do you think, I mean, in how far do you think the refugee crisis is the reason that we're here now, and also the referendum is set for June, which might be the next time the refugee crisis really peaks, and this might be influencing the referendum as well? So how much connection do you see there?
That's probably easier for the ambassador to answer. I believe that, as I said before, the heads of state and government wanted to get a deal, to get the issue out of the way, because there's so much more time needed to talk about the migration issue on the one hand. On the second hand, the whole difficulties to answer effectively, to give a European effective answer on the refugee question probably also influences the discussion, arguments and different moods in the United Kingdom, in the British discussion, but that's probably easier for the ambassador to answer.
I think that there were two things which the Prime Minister had in mind in trying to come to a deal more quickly. The first was that the longer the uncertainty goes on, the worse it is, I think, for the United Kingdom. There are companies which are taking investment decisions as to whether to invest in the UK. It is obviously better for those companies to know whether or not we're going to be in the EU. The second thing, I think, is that there are factors which have nothing to do with the United Kingdom political situation, but forthcoming elections in other European member states meant that this was a good time to do it. And on the migration question, because we're not part of the Schengen agreement, the immediate impact of that is not as great in the United Kingdom as it is in Austria, for example. And for us, it's not such an existential question. There are huge questions about the European response, and we are playing our part in a slightly different way because we're not affected by influxes of migrants, refugees at the moment. But I do think that whole crisis has made people look very carefully about the way the European Union works. I don't think it's had a negative impact on the debate in the United Kingdom, because, as I say, I don't think the immediate impact for us is as great as for some other countries.
Nikolaus, to get back to the deal, the UK is not part of the Eurozone. They don't want to be part of the Eurozone, but they want to have a certain extent of control of what happens there as far as they are affected by it. So could you maybe explain to us these new protections that Cameron wants? Do you know what? You look puzzled.
As with, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Good evening from me too. As with some of the other points in that deal, I do believe that they are mostly cosmetic. For example, saying Britain is not going to be part of the ever closer union. Yes, we know. Yeah, we have known this for a couple of decades. This is not new. When it comes to the Eurozone, I didn't want to start with this, but I like to always, for some reason, I always like to think in the completely other direction of how things are going at any moment. So what I did yesterday, I did some research on the question: how was the discussion in the UK about joining the euro, and was there at any point a chance of joining the euro after it was launched? I think there was 2 or 3 tries within the UK of certain pressure groups of getting Britain to join the euro, and for some reason, but it's really hard for me to argue this conclusively, but for some reason I still wouldn't want to rule it out within not too long time frame that Britain might actually join the euro, because the euro is one of the very few things in the EU at the moment that actually works, and Britain with outside of the eurozone economically is, for me, a huge question mark, and we see it right now with the Brexit. The British pound is basically steering towards a crisis right now. So this, if we see a pound crisis within the next 2 months, 3 months, of course it would be actually positive for the people in the UK who want to stay in the Eurozone, in the EU, because it would scare people. And generally I do think we won't see a Brexit. I never thought we would see a Brexit.
We'll get to that.
Okay. So back to the euro question. Monetary policy is a very, very complicated thing, and it's not done by politicians. It is not something that is influenced in a major way by any deal that's made in Brussels. Monetary policy is something that is done by central bankers. They have their own channels, they have their own time frames, and they have their own communication. I don't think that there will be any major problem between the Eurozone and the pound zone, if you want. You know, there will be cooperation. If Britain says we'd like to think about joining, the Eurozone will have Britain with open arms. We will then also see a test to Juncker's statement that there can't be a euro when there are border controls, because the border controls won't go away even if Britain joins. All these things for me are in the realm of possibility, even if it sounds crazy right now.
Mr. Vavrik, I understand that you're an opponent of special deals for individual EU countries, but is the UK's no to further integration maybe not only a bad thing, is it maybe a chance to pause to think about where this union is going and in which way and in which time frame we should actually reform the institutions?
I would say it could have been a chance. When I read the first speech that Mr. Cameron made in 2013, where he was advocating for reform of Europe, not just for some specialties for the UK, and he has a lot of good points. I mean, me personally as a federalist, but also my party, we support many of his arguments. A strong return to the principle of subsidiarity, a stronger Europe in terms of competitiveness and other aspects. So this could have been the kick-off of a debate on reforming certain parts of the way Europe operates, its objectives, maybe the legitimacy of the EU bodies, which is also a problem he has. But this was completely missed. It was completely missed. The 27 governments had allowed them to be held hostage of a domestic political agenda in the UK. I find it appalling and extremely disappointing. The letter of Mr. Cameron was sent on the 11th of November, and he was pressing. The agreement was done finally in the night of the 19th of February, just 3 months later, again so that he could have his referendum not at latest by the end of 2017 as he had promised, by the way also for domestic political reasons back then, by the end of 2017, but even earlier, so now the date is June. So I'm appalled. I'm appalled and disappointed because of this missed opportunity, because of the weakness of the EU states who are just panicking. Okay, we are facing so many crises as never before in the EU. We have the Russian aggression, we have the issue of Brexit, which is not yet solved. We have the migration crisis, we have the war in the Near East, we have the surge of extreme right, or at least populist parties. So in the face of all this, the reaction, oh my God, let's calm them down and let's get them what they want. And when I compare the initial demands, the letter of Mr. Cameron, or his speech, by the way, and what came out, well, he got everything he wanted. Not only got everything he wanted, but the Commission or Mr. didn't even take the opportunity to say, well, if we want to reshape the agreement, maybe we should reopen a few things. Maybe, for instance, the rebate. I would have put it on the table. Okay, you want something, you want an opt-out from the ever-closing union? Okay, let's talk about the rebate. Okay, things like that. Instead, we caved into all the demands, and I'm extremely disappointed also by the political elite in the UK itself, who has made the membership of the UK in the EU, which is a very important thing for the EU, but also for the UK and for the West in general, has made it hostage to a domestic political quarrel. I mean, the reaction of Mr. Boris Johnson, okay, is again appalling. He's a fun guy, very witty, but he acts against the interest of the city of which he's the mayor, particularly a stance pro-Brexit, just because he would like to become the next prime minister. Now, it's very courageous from his side. You know, he puts all his bet on one horse, the exit. I mean, if the British people vote for Brexit, he's the next prime minister, you know, late June. If not, it's the end of his political career. Well, I couldn't care less, but I think it's an irresponsible attitude. So we have irresponsible attitudes on the side of the British political elite. I'm not mentioning Mr. Farage, who's at least honest about where he wants to be. I'm talking about those people who claim to be pro-European. And a weakness and panic attitude of the other 27 European leaders. The opportunity to reform has missed completely. And what I think, I agree with you that probably it will be a yes to stay in Europe, yes, but this will be the beginning of another debate. There will be disappointment on the side of the British people because they will not get what they wanted. When it comes to change of the treaties, there will be bad surprises coming in.
We'll get to.
Okay, I stop here. Sorry.
Yeah,
it was a long answer to a short.
Yeah.
I'm a politician. When I start speaking, I can't stop.
Ambassador, would you like to respond to that? It was a lot of hostage and panic and irresponsible and Boris Johnson. So,
well, I'm not going to talk about Boris Johnson, but I think it's very clear that this is a subject about which people feel very emotionally, and I think it's true as much in the UK as it is here. I think it's very difficult for us to have a rational, it has been very difficult for us to have a rational debate about these issues. And I think that the danger of the Prime Minister not deciding to do what he has done was that this would hang over us for years and decades to come. We have not asked this sort of question of the British public in a generation. We have had 2 previous referendums on our membership. First when we joined, and then a few years later we asked the question again, and the British public voted about 66% to stay and 33% to leave. And since then, the European Union has changed a huge amount. And it's difficult for other countries to understand to what extent this is a real issue in domestic politics. It dominates our domestic politics. And the aim of having this referendum quickly, I don't think anybody had a gun held against their head. I don't think there were other member states who felt they were being held hostage. They were all there. This was an agreement that was reached at willingly. They could have said no. Any one of those member states, if they were unhappy with it, could have said no, as could the Commission and the Parliament. I believe that settling the question now is a good thing, not just for the United Kingdom, but for the rest of the European Union. And not settling it, I think, would have been a much more risky business. I think there's a significant risk now, but I think it's a risk that it's better to deal with at this point than to let it drag on.
Some people now say that by being against the ever closer union, Britain has killed the concept of the ever closer union. Paul Schmidt, has it been dead long before, or did they really kill it?
No, I don't think that the UK has killed the concept. there are a lot of hurdles to take to reach a real speed of this ever closer union vision. I think there are many other challenges that we face at the moment. So and maybe probably the UK is very much right on this. I mean, there is already a multi-speed Europe. We have that with Schengen, we have that with the Euro, we have that with justice and home affairs, and in the future there seem to be even more core Europes, or one core Europe which moves into the direction of an ever closer union, and other countries that will not want to join depending on the issues at stake. So I don't believe that the UK deal or the renegotiation of the referendum somehow stops this process. No.
Christoph, do you want to respond?
I disagree, I'm sorry to say. First, I beg to disagree with you, Mr. Ambassador, when you say that the UK never signed up to the concept of the ever closer union. Of course it signed the treaty. It's in Article 1 of the Treaty of the EU. So you did sign up. Now, maybe the UK didn't join in good faith. That's another matter, but you did sign up. And actually, I think I remember that it was Mr. Tony Blair who insisted that this sentence be kept in the Maastricht Treaty. I'm not sure about it, but I think there was even some prominent UK politician who insisted on keeping this clause. Now, we all know, of course, that the UK never believed in it, because the UK never believed in the political project of Europe. They always treated it as a better free trade zone. I think the rest of Europe always thought, okay, we know this, but with time they will come to love it. It's like an arranged marriage, okay? Love will come with time. Well, obviously it did not come. And today, may I quote from your Prime Minister when he talks about the ever political, closer union. He says quite strong words, and at least he's honest. You must take it. The commitment in the treaties on ever closer union is not a commitment that should apply any longer to Britain. We do not believe in it. We do not subscribe to it. We have a different vision of Europe. So, for the first time, we have accepted to put in an agreement that yes, it's not about different speeds. It's about different objectives. We have in Europe where a member, it's not about how fast he will get there, but he doesn't want to get there at all. He wants to go elsewhere. So I'm a member of a soccer club, but really, I'd rather play rugby. So I won't take part in the training. I will decide myself when I join in the field or not. And by the way, when I join the field, let's play by rugby rules, because I didn't train for soccer. So that's the situation we have today. So, and it is very, I wouldn't underestimate the sentence of the ever closer union. And I'm quoting again, the House of Commons. It is not a think tank, it's not a small opposition politician from another EU country who says this. It's not an academic, it's the House Committee who did a study about all those demands and says, as far as this clause is concerned, UK disengagement from the concept could be politically significant as it could be used, now listen to that, to advocate further opt-outs in future treaty negotiations or to resist integrationist initiatives. So, we don't have a settlement. We have opened a Pandora's box, and the time will come, the UK will draw on this agreement and then resist majority voting on completely different things. And, this decision, this rule, this directive, that's actually goes into political liberation, and we have opted out of it. So it doesn't apply to us. We haven't settled anything, Mrs. Ambassador. I think the real trouble will start on the 23rd of June if the UK stays in, and I don't know what's the worst of the two. The UK leaving, or the UK leaving, staying under those conditions?
Yeah.
Can I answer?
Yes, let me just add another question. You can of course add to that, and then I would like to leave the field of emotions for a second and get maybe to the city of London. Okay.
Very hard to leave the field of emotions with European federalists. Yeah. Or nationalists, for that matter. Back to the City of London. I'll start with the City of London.
Well, the question is, with the City of London, a lot of big businesses that have their European headquarters in the City of London have said very early and have said repeatedly that in case the European Union leaves, if the UK leaves the European Union, they will leave London because then they lose their access to the internal market. So maybe you can do a bit of fortune telling in both cases for the City of London.
It's so hard because it's not like Britain's going, if there will be a Brexit, it's not like Britain's going to leave and then close its borders and you know, dust off its ships and guard the canal. There will be, that's what the people who want to leave are saying, there will be immediate negotiations about a free trade deal. So basically they would start from the beginning, like you said, they see the EU as a better free trade deal. They would just start from that. And I was checking on my cell phone because I didn't want to say something stupid about the euro, the parts were in the agreement that's regarding the euro. So I was not checking my emails. And it's funny, you know, because when you look at the idea of Britain saying, yeah, we'd like to have a legal binding agreement that the Eurozone cannot regulate our banks. Well, the Eurozone can't regulate their banks because they are not in the Eurozone. So basically, you only need that agreement if you want to join the Eurozone. So that's interesting, no? Yes, if I were the City of London, if I were the UK, I would be very nervous about regulating the banks because that's basically what the UK, in broad strokes, has to offer the world economy right now. It's so-called financial innovation, which every 7 to 10 years gets the world into a lot of trouble. So that is a point that's, I don't know the solution. I don't. The banks in the Eurozone are saying, we understand that there needs to be a regulation, but you need to regulate the big banks. You need to regulate the investment banks. Why are you regulating me? I'm not giving out any credit to homeowners or hopeful homeowners because there's so much of regulation. And then the ECB is saying, well, here, have more money, give out that credit, and they're saying no, because we want you to change the regulation. This really is a problem, because if there's too much regulation, then business doesn't start flowing. If there's not enough regulation, you know, it'll collapses. So I don't have a solution. I don't. We will see another financial crisis. I don't know if it will start in London again, because we have to say that a big part of the last Lehman crisis came out of London because they didn't have as much regulation, not even as much as New York has, and they don't have much. And at the same time, you know, Frankfurt, Paris, they also want to be important financial centers. And now they have a race with each other who gets to be the yuan hub for the world, the Chinese currency. But maybe I want to say something about the ever closer union. There are many countries, many politicians, and a lot of people in Europe and in the EU who don't want an ever closer union. Acting like it's the end-all be-all of the European Union to end up in some sort of United States of Europe, like has been done during the height of the Euro crisis by some people, I think is counterproductive. Because I personally don't see it. I don't see it happening. I personally see the diversity of Europe. You know, there's always this motto, diversity is our strength. I also see it in the diversity of nation states, and it has always been this way. Yes, cooperation is very important, so we don't go to war with each other. The euro itself is one of the most important parts of this, I would say, because countries who use the same currency will think twice before entering military conflict. And right now, it's not only the UK. When you see the political point of it, it's not only the UK. We already talked about the refugee crisis, right? So the refugee crisis has reshaped Europe within a year, and absolutely not. It was absolutely not a step to ever close the union. It was a step back to nationalism. So when the refugee crisis starts again, will we see a European solution where Eastern European countries agree to take in thousands of refugees that they didn't want last year? No, absolutely not. Their European cooperation consists of guarding the border together in a 2016 version of the four and the cheap. But this time it's Hungary, Czech Republic, Poland, and Slovakia. So right now, talking about the ever closer union and also giving Britain the fault for this idea not getting any more traction right now is too easy. I'm not saying it's cheap, I'm saying it's too easy because you could also say that Angela Merkel is not helping the idea of an ever closer union by forcing her version of it down the throat of everybody else in Europe.
Ambassador, would you like to react to any of this?
I think it's very unhelpful to hypothesize about what might happen in the future. I think it's unhelpful to assume that the agreement that is on the table is only the start of the United Kingdom asking for more and more exceptions. And I also think that it's absolutely right that we're not alone in the way that we see the European Union at the moment. If you look at attitudes towards the EU, the most recent surveys show that actually the Austrian public has a more negative attitude towards the EU than the British public does. And so we are not, as you said, the only people articulating these views. The country which most recently had a referendum on EU issues was Denmark. And they voted to continue an opt-out of measures on justice and home affairs, which the United Kingdom has opted into many of. So I think it is a period where Europe is in a crisis. Some of those pressures are external, but some of them come from within our own populations. I think there are many reasons for that. I think a profound economic crisis has brought many people to question how capable the European Union is of dealing with many of those things. I think too many of our politicians are too ready to blame Brussels when things go wrong, because it's very easy to do that, and that's not just in the United Kingdom, that happens all over Europe. I think also that the reality is that the geopolitical situation of countries within Europe has changed. As you said, recent events have shown splits. Old splits which have reopened and new splits which are now obvious. Before there was a very definite north-south, now the splits are different. And the geography and the geometry between the countries is different. And I think we have to recognise that that's happening. Pretending it's not happening and hoping it will just go away is the same as us ignoring those voices in the UK which have called for the British public to be able to express its views on this situation. So I think that these are not questions which will go away, but I think it is not actually fair to say that we are the only ones in this position. I don't think it's fair either to suggest that this is just the start of something which will involve us basically withdrawing from every part of the European Union. It is not true either to say that we are only interested in the single market. It is very clear that that is a big part of what we see the benefits of our membership to be. But it's not just that. We see big security benefits in being part of the European Union. Some of the justice and home affairs measures which allow us to exchange information on criminals and extradite people within, or exchange prisoners within the European Union. If somebody's arrested, they can be brought back to Britain using the European arrest warrant very easily. Those sorts of measures help all of us. And finally, I would say, and I'm a diplomat, so I think this is really, really important, in terms of foreign policy, the European Union is an active and very positive voice in the world. If you look at the Ukraine crisis, the European Union was at the front of confronting and the lead of confronting Russian aggression in Ukraine. And similarly, something which I've personally been involved in, the negotiations with Iran, which have led to the agreement in July next year. The European Union was the impetus for that, which is the most successful piece of diplomacy any country has been engaged in recent years. So I think, yes, the single market is important, but that's not the only benefit that we see from our membership.
Paul, you want to say something? And also I would like you to talk a bit about the winners and losers in terms of trade, maybe in case Britain really leaves. Like, I think half of Britain's trade is with the European Union or something, and I mean, for example, in case companies really move out of London, Frankfurt might be happy to take them in, or things like that.
Okay, let me maybe first react to the discussion as it is at the moment. It is very true that the UK is not the only one who is in a critical position regarding the European integration process. But my big question mark with this is, do you pretend to solve all these questions by the issues that you have negotiated and by the deal that you have reached? I've read I've read many analyses about the deal that was reached at the EU summit in February, and sometimes it seems to be the question was how to make a largely non-existent problem even worse. We've made somehow a big deal out of small things, and it is those small things that do not really reform the European Union, that do not really address the preoccupations and problems that we see with European integration. That is my main concern and my main problem with this whole deal. The EU is there to solve those issues. True, we're all EU. It takes the member states to enable the European Union to solve these issues, but we have to address them. And I wonder if they were addressed with this deal. Austrians have a more negative attitude than the Brits towards the European Union. I'm not so sure about this. I would say that criticism and skepticism is something which is very strong in this country here. But we also know when we ask this in and out question, we have a two-thirds majority of people who would say no. I mean, we would like to have it changed. We have our own views on these issues, but we would very much prefer to stay in this club, even if it's not a perfect club. Others have had referenda, true, but very much on single issues, be it treaties, be it opt-outs or opt-ins. But this in and out question is of I think of a different dimension. I would say. The verdict on the European reply to the refugee crisis is something that we can probably analyze in 5 years. It's probably too early to see whether we can actually come up with a common reply to this or not. My guess would be, I'm an optimist, I think there will be a common approach to this issue. There has been in the past, whenever there was a real strong crisis and the pressure was high enough, we actually managed to reach common approaches to solving those issues, and I'm confident that this time it won't be much different. To the issue of ever closer union, I mean, yes, the Lisbon Treaty was ratified by the UK. You're of course right with this. On the other hand, there are also parts in the treaty that actually emphasize the special status of the UK on this issue. So what we have seen in this deal is a repetition of what we already know. In fact, it's emphasizing that the UK doesn't have to go that path if it doesn't want to. And you're perfectly right by saying that there are other countries who do not want to go into the deepening of integration, and that's something I think one has to respect. Interesting to see that, because you've mentioned the central banking world, that sometimes in politics we push for arguments of becoming independent or remaining independent from certain economic developments when it comes to regulation, but also when it comes to banking supervision. But in real difficult times, and I tend to agree with you, there might be situations when on a technical level, on a central bank level, even the Bank of England is happy to have some support by the European Central Bank. So no, but I'm just saying that one is the political level and the other one is the economic financial reality. And what we see in times of referenda is that a lot of times we use arguments to lobby for one way or the other, but sometimes they have their distance to reality. And on the question of trade, I mean, I believe that trade issues is key for the United Kingdom as well as for the European Union. I believe that in trade terms, the UK would both would lose. UK would lose much more than the European Union. Just think of the free trade agreements which would have to be renegotiated, and you're in a much weaker position to negotiate a free trade agreement if you're the size of the UK or the size of the European Union, with all the problems that the European Union might have in reaching free trade agreements. But it has a different, on a global level, it has a much different, much higher, stronger economic power than the UK. That's clear.
Mr. Vavrik, you're still with us? Okay. I guess you have a lot to say to everything you just heard, maybe. But another question: let's just pretend for a second that we believe that it will really happen, that Britain leaves the European Union. The European Union, being a man after a breakup, sitting on his sofa, eating ice cream, being sad about his girlfriend leaving him, what would he miss about the UK? And I'm asking that to you because you know why.
Okay, we would miss a lot. Let me be clear about it. I think it would be a disaster. Mr. Cameron repeatedly said that he looks at this cold-headed and with no emotion, unlike us, the other Europeans, from the continent. I'm trying to prove him right. I'm showing emotions because I think when it comes to Europe, it was another affair. And why I'm advocating so strongly for UK staying in and B not messing it up is because I see a destiny for Europe on a global level, and I think that the UK is a big part of it. I'm with you, Mrs. Ambassador. I mean, the UK has played a very important, very positive role ever since it joined the EU, even before. Okay, I can go back to World War I. So it would be a big loss. It would be a loss in terms of the weight the EU will have, or Europe, in political terms, in military terms, in economic terms, in culture terms, in every respect. We would lose a big partner. If this happened, I'd be very unhappy. I said it before, I'm anguished at both prospects. At the UK leaving the EU, with all the council it has, by the way, for the British people as well, because I think the UK will break apart, and so it will be extremely messy. but also from the European perspective, and even on a more global level from the point of, if I may say so, the West. But I disagree with you, Mrs. Ambassador, to say, well, you know, we shouldn't hypothesize about this. I think, I'm a politician, I think we should prepare for the worst. And I think we should prepare what if scenario. What if on the 23rd of June the UK opts to leave? It will be very messy. We'll have negotiations about the conditions of departure. They will suck in a lot of energy in Europe because this is not, you know, Liechtenstein leaving us. It's the UK. It's the third biggest economy. I think the third biggest or second biggest contributor, despite of the rebate. Nuclear power, a country who has a seat in the Security Council, a permanent seat, etc., etc. And by the way, I think the UK is more than just a financial hub. I think the UK, in many respects, is the forefront of technology in many industries, not just financial wizardry. This as well, I must say. So it will be a big loss for Europe. There will be also repercussions on other countries saying, okay, we also want to opt out. It could be a bad example. So I don't know how the rest of Europe will react. Are we going to make it really tough to the British to show the others, okay, that's the price you have to pay it, or are we going to be gentlemen and say, fine, I mean, you can leave a club. Nothing wrong with that. Actually, you could argue maybe the EU has reached a point of maturity in its life where it should be accepted that occasionally a member can leave. Why not? I think the moment is not the right one, and I wish he wouldn't have started with such a big member. As I said, Liechtenstein is fine. So, you know, to exercise what happened if, maybe not the UK. It's a pity.
Okay. To everyone who wants to answer this one, as Mr. Vavrik has said, in case they vote to leave the Union, according to the treaties, they would have to enter into negotiations about the new relationship the UK has to the European Union. Then the time frame for that set out in the treaties is 2 years. That can be extended. As I said, the British are very tough negotiators, so a lot of people think that they would negotiate a status where they're in without being in, basically. So, and especially since it is also in the interest of Europe to keep Britain close, even in the case they will leave. So, what do you think these negotiations or could look like? This relationship could look like? Yeah.
I'm confused. I think they already have negotiated a status where they are in without being in. Is that not the idea? I mean, it says in the deal that Britain can opt out of an ever closer union. What does it even mean? I mean, do you, at some point, if you opt out of being in the ever closer union while the union grows together, are you not per se out? You know. But again, yes, it would be catastrophic for both sides, and that's one of the reasons why I think it won't happen, and why there will be enormous pressure from all sides of the European and British establishment on the public not to do the wrong thing. We've seen this time and time again when it comes to democratic decisions within the EU. Right now we are in the phase where it says, you know, really, if you want to stay in Europe, you need to get out, you need to mobilize people. Look at what could happen. The pound is going down. Everybody's G20 are saying it's not a good idea. The IMF is saying it's not a good idea. Basically, everything that has an acronym is saying that it's not a good idea. And it reminds me of what we saw here in Vienna during the last elections. There was also this phase where everybody was getting super panicked about Strache becoming Bürgermeister, and then in the end it was basically a technique used to really rile up the people and get the SPÖ, the socialist voters out there, and you know, for one last hurrah for Hyper, and I think it will be something like that. I really can't see the UK leaving. I also can't see Boris leaving after the UK says yes, actually. I mean, when it comes to Boris or even Nigel Farage, the ironic thing is, if they leave, you know, especially Farage, if they leave, what is he gonna do, you know? You know, does he change the name of his party? Because then the UK is, in his thinking, independent already. In some way, at least Farage maybe doesn't even want to leave the EU, because that's all he knows, you know, bashing Brussels. So a 2-year negotiation between London and Brussels, which is a 2-year negotiation de facto between London and Berlin about Britain leaving the EU, absolute disaster. Absolute disaster. History books will see it as the end of. I mean, you just said that the EU has reached a certain maturity where we can lose certain parts, you know. But if something has reached a certain maturity, what comes next? Death.
Everything is very dramatic here tonight.
No, I mean it is dramatic. It is dramatic, but yeah, I personally don't think it's going to happen. If it's going to happen, it's going to be an extreme event. And I want to add maybe the perspective of a very, very bird's eye geopolitical view. There is a future in Eurasian trade. You know, ask the Chinese what they want to do. You know, I'm talking about the Silk Road going from Beijing to Warsaw and yes to London. The UK leaving the EU would first of all weaken the UK, would weaken the EU in trade negotiations with the Chinese and the Russians once we are on nice terms again, and it would leave, and that's a real danger. It would leave the UK isolated, because when you look at the world. There is one big landmass, that's the Eurasian landmass, that's Europe, Russia, India, China, and then there is, if you want to be really nasty, the island countries, you know, UK, US, South America, and Africa. And from a like 100-year point of view, it would be a very bad idea not to take part in the Eurasian project.
Thank you. Ambassador, is the UK already in without being in? Or can it get
out without really being out? I think that we're not the only ones. You know, the idea that there's a sort of solid block where everybody is in exactly the same position, and then there's the UK, which is separate, is just not right. There are a number of countries who have different relationships with different bits of the European apparatus. You know, some of us are members of NATO, some of us are not. Some of us are in Schengen, some of us are not. Some of us participate fully in the JHA, some of us do not. Some of us have shut our borders, some of us have not. So I think there's a whole range of different relationships which are there. I think that what David Cameron has put on the table for the 23rd of June is an agreement which answers not all of the questions, because it was a negotiation, so there was never going to be a definitive answer to all those questions, and it's also, as you rightly said, not the end of a process. But, as I said before, we are not the only people asking these questions, and as you say, a mature organisation is not rigid and fixed. It has to evolve and change. And if anybody thinks that the way the European Union looks now is the same as it will look in 2 years' time, it's certainly not the same as it looked 2 years ago. They are wrong. So this will not be the last time we have such questions. You know, these will continue to preoccupy us, and that's the right thing. It's not wrong that people ask these questions. It's a good thing. The answers to the questions may not be the same for everybody, and they may not make everybody feel comfortable. But I think just pretending that nobody is asking the questions and that Europe is perfect and that it can't get any better is a very, very dangerous mindset.
Okay, thank you. Short answer, because we have to hand it over to the audience.
Yes, of course. No, I totally agree. I don't think that anyone today would say that would pretend that the European Union is perfect. I would say that the majority of countries, governments, and also people would say, no, there needs to be reform and improvements. And the question is, what are the things that need to be changed, and can they be changed in a referendum situation? And I must say that on this issue I have my doubts, but I agree with you that this is probably an ongoing process and will not stop after the referendum. Just one word: if the UK decides, the British people decide to leave, I don't think that others would follow this example, because everyone is in a different situation. But I would agree that the consequences would be rather terrible for all of us. But it will not happen. I tend to believe. I tend to agree with you that there's a lot of worst case scenarios floating around in this discussion, and we will see even worse cases of worst case scenarios once we get closer to the 23rd of June.
Can I maybe just add one sentence? Just one sentence. I think that nobody thinks that the European Union is perfect, and nobody thinks that we are not in a crisis. And I actually tend to believe that the fact that we are talking about crisis all the time, the fact that there's actually, at least we know that we have problems. You know, we're not lying to ourselves and telling ourselves everything is jolly good. And that's one of the biggest strengths, actually, when you look at the world right now, because the Chinese are lying to themselves. I believe that the Americans are lying to themselves a lot too. And the Europeans at least have a feeling for the fact that there are problems. I think that's a good thing.
But one more sentence, if I may, which is I think very important issue. I think sometimes we're just lacking self-esteem in the European Union, and I keep stressing that, because we keep we keep making us worse and worse than we are, in fact. And yes, we need to change a lot of things, and we need to reform, but the situation is not that bad. I mean, talk with Americans and listen to Americans how they would talk about their country or the United States of America, and then listen to some of the Europeans on how they talk and how they analyze the European developments, and the difference would be shocking.
Okay, we're now opening up this discussion to you. Questions are short and end with a question mark.
I'm wondering what is the impact of the negotiation now for the manageability of the European Union? Because if we now have again a national whatever blocking thing, then I think the manageability will further decrease, which is actually not in the mind of Cameron, or was not in the mind of Cameron.
Let's collect a couple of questions.
I have a question to the ambassador. In case the UK leaves the European Union, what would be the status of the people that come out of the that are from the European Union and that work in the UK, that maybe have a flat in the UK, maybe live in the UK? What would be their status? I mean, right now they are allowed to be there and allowed to work because we are in the European Union levels. What would change?
Hello there, Lawrence Cattle, fellow of the Austrian Institute for European Security Policy and British citizen. First of all, I'd like to say that yes, I am 100% in favour of us staying in the European Union, so I will be voting in favour, and I sincerely hope we stay in. The question really is more to the ambassador, but then it will be that maybe other people can pitch in. We can't assume that the UK will not, that will just say, oh, we'll just choose to stay in. There's a problem with that, is if you actually look at the figures, in the Eurobarometer of 2013, 23% of the people in Britain actually said that they had never even heard of the European Parliament. 29% of the British population had never even heard of the European Commission. So what I want to know from the ambassador more at the side is how is the UK government now going to campaign in favour of staying in the European Union, and also what might some of those follow-ups be? More increased education about the European Union and other things, particularly in the media. Thank you.
Okay, Ambassador, you want to start?
Just before we go any further, you can ask questions of other people on this panel if you want to. Your first question about manageability. There are already possibilities for individual member states to block things, but those are last resorts. I mean, the way the European Union works is that very few of us ever have to exercise that right, because we enter into what can sometimes seem like endless negotiations late at night to try and iron out the problems to make sure that you don't have one country which is isolated. So I think those are in extremis things, and I would not expect them to be used often, if at all. The Prime Minister has exercised a veto once in December 2011, and I think it was a very scarring moment for him. He was isolated in Brussels and blocked something. So I don't think it's something that he would choose to repeat if he could avoid it. The second question about EU nationals living in the UK and UK nationals living in the rest of the European Union. I don't know. That would be subject to negotiation. You know, that is why a decision to leave raises all sorts of very, very difficult questions. So I don't know. It would be part of the negotiation, those 2 years. Maximum of 2 years, possibly extended. And of course, you know, the issues are access to healthcare, payment of your pension, access to social security, ability to live and work without having a work permit. You know, all these things, they would be on the table for negotiation. And finally, what's the government going to do to campaign, make the positive case for Britain staying in? I agree with you on education and the press. I have been horrified by the level of ignorance amongst educated people in the UK about the European Union and what it's all about. It's not a very sexy subject. On the other hand, it is not difficult to make a really positive case about the benefits to individual citizens. Now, any of you who are student age in this room know what a wonderful thing the Erasmus programme is. I mean, people do not talk enough about that. We haven't made strongly enough the case that anybody with a mobile phone now, not immediately, but by 2017, will not get charged ridiculously expensive roaming charges when they use their phone in the other countries of the European Union. These are really positive things, and that is the case, as well as the broader economic security, economic and security case for us staying, that the government will start to make. The government, with the exception of 5 government ministers who have been given the opportunity, who do not believe that we should stay, and in an almost unprecedented case, what we call collective government responsibility has been suspended, and those ministers have been allowed to campaign to leave, 5 of them. But the rest of the government, from the Prime Minister down, will be making very strongly the case, and it will be a case based on facts, not a case based on emotions. There will be very strong economic arguments that are made. I think a lot of people in the business community will also come out arguing that we should stay. I think the Prime Minister has already made a very good start on making the case. He's already made 3 speeches where he has been very clear about the benefits to us, and I think we can expect him to continue to do so.
Paul wants to say something about the manageability?
Yeah, even if the UK decides to leave, I think one thing is for sure, British humour will stay with us. That's one of the most important issues. But on question number 1, on the impact of the deal, or the impact the deal might have on the manageability of the EU, I think there won't be much impact because the deal actually doesn't have very much of substance, I would say. The only thing where I would see an impact on the manageability might be on regarding the red cards possibility by national parliaments, but I think it will be limited and won't have much of an impact. You have to, but that's one issue where, say, I really expected the UK to have more proposals on how to reform the European Union to make it more effective, and that's something that I missed.
One short comment on the question of the campaign. Now, I don't know how many elected politicians are in this room, but I'm one of them. I can tell you, when it comes to politics and votes, facts and figures count for very little. And we mentioned before the decision to no by the Danish people. Again, facts and figures didn't count. It was a gut feeling, okay, we want to show you we're unhappy with you. So as this referendum comes at a moment where the feeling towards me is certainly not a positive one, including the UK, paired or added to the lack of knowledge, as you mentioned, right? By the way, it's not just in the EU. I don't think in Austria it would be much better, okay, the actual knowledge about the operation. So those things two together, I wish Mr. Cameron good luck. It's an uphill fight, and when I see the campaigners for the exit, Mr. Johnson, for instance, well, he doesn't come with facts and figures. He comes with a strong rhetoric. I mean, he mentions the legal colonization of Great Britain by the EU. He mentions infiltration. Those are the words he used, okay? And from his point of view, those are the right words. And to counter them with facts and figures and the acquis, etc., it will be an uphill battle.
More questions?
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Peter, and I want to touch a topic which has been mentioned a few times today, but not really addressed. And so, you mentioned the danger of making multiple classes of members of the European Union, not just by different agreements, but just because of special agreements that each country strikes with the European Union. And I would appreciate especially Mr. Schmidt's answer to that question, but also everybody else's view on whether we missed now an opportunity to really have a holistic reform of the EU system, institutions, etc. And will we maybe see this in the future, or will we just see further country individual cherry picking?
Yeah, I would like to know, in the case of Brexit, what would this mean to the political stability within the UK? What would this mean for the Scottish independence movement, for the Northern Ireland peace process, for example? If you have a European border within Ireland, would maybe Ireland consider leaving the EU as well? All those points that are in this region. That, yeah.
Hello. I had a question that maybe has been touched upon, which is, if you look at nation states or democracies, they've been built over thousands of years, or hundreds of thousands of years. And when people sold democracy to people, they didn't sell little arrangements about property rights, or said, oh, well, for the moment democracies are only for certain people, but we're working on the little arrangements. What they sold is really a vision. And this is something that is lacking. And I think this is also something that is lacking for young people when they're trying to identify with the European Union, because most of the arguments that are talked about are about trade, economics, which are all valuable arguments, but not so much about the culture, all these things that we experience day to day that are about Europe, and what other people think about Europe. These are never talked about, and I think this is something really lacking in the discussions. Thank you.
Who wants to start?
Can I start at the end? It's a very interesting question. I'd say when you look at the history of the European Union, the fact that it's a very technocratic and very economically concentrated project has of course to do with the fact how it started as a coal and steel union between France and Germany. And I have a very hard time to say that that's a bad thing, because I do believe that economic cooperation is, well, I actually believe that economic cooperation is even more important than political cooperation. So that's a good point to start. When you look at the euro, for example, they also had this grand idea that first you start at the currency, and then when the first crisis hits, the countries will immediately set up a European finance ministry and all that kind of stuff that wasn't going to happen in the 80s. Well, it hasn't happened so far, but the euro still works. And I think that what you're asking is the unanswered question about the European Union. When you look at German unification, and I'm not talking about 89, I'm talking about the actual German unification 100 years before. When you look at how the different German states were arguing with each other in history, it is a close resemblance to what we're doing in Europe right now. So when the Bavarians didn't want to join a unified Germany, what they became to hear was, I don't know if there's an English word for it, was Kleinstaaterei. And that's the same thing that we hear today. Every time somebody says, let's do this because Austria benefits, it's Kleinstaaterei. But, and there's the big but, there was a definite binding element within the German states, and that was that they were German states. They had a binding ethical and ethnical, and also the language. And you're reflecting that. So my answer on this is that I don't have one.
Thanks. Who wants to go next year? Please be a little shorter in the answers because we would like to hear some more questions.
Okay. On the question whether we missed the opportunity for an holistic reform of the European Union, I think the United Kingdom missed the opportunity of asking and pressuring for real reforms. They talked reforms, but actually wanted to, or meant reducing immigration and saving money. It's probably not, I think it's not the right time. Well, I personally think we need this kind of reform as soon as possible, but politically I would say it's not the right time, because you won't get majorities for real real reform, which we actually need at the moment. So we take it step by step. That's the European way of doing integration, it seems.
Could I answer the Scottish question?
Yes.
What sort of the political implications for the United Kingdom as a whole, without speculating too much, I think it's very clear that there would be very serious implications. We only have one land border in the United Kingdom. It's with the Republic of Ireland. It is very clear that if a proper border had to be established there, the economic implications for Northern Ireland would be huge. There are people who live and work across that border all the time, so there would be serious consequences. From there, to take the step to say that Northern Ireland would want to secede from the rest of the United Kingdom, I think that's probably not the case. But certainly in Scotland there would be some very, very serious questions about where Scotland wanted to be. I mean, I obviously can't speculate about it any more than that, but yes, there would be, I think, some very, very difficult questions which emerged.
Very briefly, on the question of the missed opportunity, I agree completely with my neighbour. On the vision of the lady in the back, let me be again emotional. Yes, I think you're right. The question of EU membership, it's not bean counting exercise, and this is why I'm so upset with the current debate. It's not about a couple of million, remittances for children abroad. I mean, this is not how we're going to save them. Even the roaming charge is not what will convince people. And then to the question, Mr. Ambassador, you several times mentioned, okay, the others are misbehaving as just as much. Well, yes, Mr. Orban is misbehaving and Mr. Kaczynski is misbehaving, but I had wished that some people of the format of Mr. Cameron would not misbehave, and not reduce the question of the UK staying or not in the EU to a bean counting exercise. I was hoping for more than him, and I'm putting him on a different level than those other you know, nasty guys who are not contributing now to the European vision, because we do need a vision. I agree with you.
One little sentence, because I have to say, the whole problem with the vision and the culture that's binding European countries together is it's really, really complicated, and there are so many conflicts. I mean, if you look at the history of Europe, obviously there's more conflicts than things that are binding us together. And one thing that came to my head is I went through all the propositions for the design of Euro banknotes. Took me a whole night. I'm a bit of a freak, and they had like reasonings with every argument. You know, let's have grand buildings of Europe. Let's have big people from Europe's past. And with every, I mean, that's the reason why we have bridges and windows, and we have bridges and windows that are not that don't exist, because every time there was a concrete idea of, you know, we put in a person or we put in a building, they'll say there's no way to make this fair. It always needs to be fair. You can't have 3 persons from Germany and 2 persons from France. I mean, a war will start over that, you know. So that really shows this problem of unifying Europe on the basis of not offending each other. You know, that's right now has hit a roadblock.
One very quick last round of questions, and I'm sorry we don't have more time.
First of all, thank you. My question is for the Austrians who are arguing that if the UK leaves, it would be a disaster for both sides, for the UK and the EU. What do you say to people who are pro-EU, who stand by the argument that we want the UK to leave because it's clear that they don't want to be here and they're just standing as a roadblock to our efforts at further integration policies?
Question to the whole panel. Looking back to 2004, do you think it was a mistake to enlarge before we deepened the EU?
Any more questions? One more we can take? They're doing that on purpose.
We hear there's a lot of discomfort among the smaller countries, but the whole thing is being driven by France, Germany, this locomotive. Without the UK, will this be more of a problem? How will the balance of power change within the Union?
Thank you. Who wants to start? Still writing? Yes?
I will start, but I also had to but which one?
Enlargement, maybe? No?
Hard to say. It happened. No, it might be a mistake. Might be the right thing to do. We will never know. France and Germany, maybe. Well, the UK is already trying to opt out. The question, I think that I'm always coming back to the euro. One of the points that the Brits make when they argue for joining the euro is that they don't want Germany to completely dominate the continent. I think it's more about Germany than it's about France, to be honest. Maybe it's also again a historic thing, British angst. I don't know. And the question, if we should leave, if you should just let the UK leave so we can you know get back on track. I think if you look at it from a federalist point of view, yes, it might be an idea, but I can tell you as a journalist, the idea of having 2 years with a possible extension, you said, of negotiations between London and Brussels, the press is going to have a field day. No, a field year, 2 field years. I mean, there is not going to be any progress in European integration in those 2 years, and there is the real danger of extreme damage to the European Union in that time. So I think people in Brussels will not think this way. I think that they see that there's too much of a danger.
To the question of UK being a roadblock, yes, I agree, and that's you know, if we wake up on the 24th of June and the UK exits and we try to console myself, saying, okay, maybe we have a new start. You know, politics don't evolve gradually, yeah, in fits and starts, and maybe 1 year from after that we look back and say, well, the exit of UK was actually a moment of catharsis that spurred the 27 other members to start anew and fresh. Maybe this will happen, I hope. I doubt it. So I do see the UK staying as the lesser of two evils, but still an evil, of course, as a federalist. Now, under those conditions. Now, the mistake about enlarging before deepening, no, I don't think it was a mistake. I think it was an opportunity. Those 100 million people, 10 countries had exited the forced embrace of the Soviet Union. We had to take them in, and it was if you look where Poland is today, I'm not mentioning politically with the current government, but economically and socially, etc., and you compare Ukraine, you see the difference. And by the way, in 1989, the GDP per head of Ukraine was still higher than that of Poland. So you see what benefit it makes to, at least economically, for a country to come in. I think it was the right decision. And the last question, the balance of power, well, this is shifting anyway. And I think that the decline of France, which is maybe even a terminal decline, you know, I mean, Portugal was once a great power, and where it is today, has more to do with whether countries exit or enter the EU.
I think I agree with what has been said. I mean, balance of power is something that is changing all the time. The French-German relationship is very predominant. Yes, I think UK plays an important role to balance the balance of power within Europe. Mistake to enlarge before you deepen. No, because I agree with what you have said, that it was a political opportunity that had to be seized, but it is true that the economic differences do challenge us today, I would say. And what do I say to people that say that they want the UK to leave? First of all, I would say, or I can say here that the majority of Austrians would like to see the UK staying within the European Union. I think people understand that the UK has an important role to play within the European Union. I personally would say that it could play an even more important role. What people do not want is a cherry picking, because they want the European Union to be able to solve their problems, and they want to see the benefits from the whole project. If they don't see that it is beneficial for them, then we will reach a very, very difficult moment, I would say.
Last words.
On the enlargement question, I agree. I don't think there was politically anything else that we could do, and I think it was absolutely the right thing to do. And your point about Poland and the Ukraine is one I've heard before. I also think that when we look at what's now happening further east, it is very clear that us being able to confront those threats together is the right way to confront them, and the only way to confront them. Interestingly, the last enlargement, or the last but one enlargement, is the root of some of the issues that we have in the UK with migration and access to benefits, because the United Kingdom at that point did not exercise its right to put in transitional controls with two of the countries that joined, and there were huge numbers of people that came into the United Kingdom then. It was a mistake. It was a mistake, and I think it's been recognised that it was a mistake. And again, one of the things in the new package is a reference to the importance of transitional controls in any future enlargements. If I could just make one final point, it's been really interesting, and it's been great to have so many questions and to hear the different points of view. I mean, you and I don't agree on some of this, but I think we agree fundamentally that the European Union has been a force for good, not just here, but in the world more broadly. And I think when you asked about vision, our values, our culture, are things that people aspire to. And one of the reasons that people from war-torn, conflict-ridden regions want to come to Europe is not just because they think they will earn more money here. It is because we have a political, social system, organisation that they think is good and that they would like to be part of. And I think that is the message that we need to put across more often and more loudly.
Before we wrap this up with one last thing, I would like to invite you all to stick around after the debate and have wine and finger food with us. You can ask some more questions to the panelists. Now one last round, and I want one word as an answer. Will they stay or will they go? One word. I mean one word, Nikolaus.
They'll join the euro.
Enfant terrible. Yeah.
Stay.
Stay.
Hopefully stay.
Thank you. Have a good evening.